we found no evidence for links between offshore wind development to date and these strandings, and that the strandings predated even these site assessment surveys.
I remember my first exposure to offshore wind. It was on vacation in Cape May, New Jersey, and there were signs all over the place, in yards, in business windows, in road medians, all saying the same thing. Save the whales, stop offshore wind. 2023 saw headlines of whale strandings on beaches up and down the East Coast, and there was, in particular, a 3-letter national cable news network desperately trying to make a connection between offshore wind development and whale strandings. But looking back at their extensive coverage today, they never once reported or presented facts connecting the two. Instead, they covered community groups and opposition groups, letting them present their own quote-unquote facts unchallenged. Regardless, it is a message that took hold, and when speaking with people on the ground in coastal areas, it's clear the anti-offshore wind messaging had its desired effect. But thankfully, there are people willing to do the research and present the facts to the public. We're going to speak to one of them today. I'm Barry Weigel. This is Plugging In. Welcome to Plugging In, powering our way to a brighter and healthier New York. I'm your host, Barry Weigel. Each episode on this podcast, we will discuss a different topic related to clean energy, explaining complex topics in a way you can understand. Become part of the community as we help to make a brighter and healthier New York.
As the sun crests on the horizon, a new day dawns in our state. A new hope for tomorrow is rising, a clean future we create. Tomorrow we breathe easier, tomorrow the skies are clear. Today we are plugging in, the future of New York is here.
Joining us now on the podcast is Lesley Thorne, an associate professor in the School of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences at Stonybrook University. Lesley, thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
So you published a paper earlier this year along with co-author Dave Wiley entitled Evaluating Drivers of Recent Large Whale Strandings on the East Coast of the United States. Can you begin by speaking a little bit about what research you did for this project?
Yeah, absolutely. In the U.S., there is a national strandings database, which provides information on species of marine mammals that strand and when and where they strand. So essentially, we dived into that database in order to better understand patterns that have been seen here on the US coast in recent years. So we looked at those patterns in space and time of strandings, focusing in particular on humpback whales, which are the species that have been stranding most frequently on the East Coast. And we looked at patterns in space and time of those strandings relative to different anthropogenic threats, such as entanglement in fishing gear, vessel strikes. Those two factors are known to be globally important threats to large whales like humpback whales. Mm-hmm. And we also considered factors relevant to the offshore wind industry. And we looked at what has been happening in terms of offshore wind in 3 different stages, sort of pre-construction, construction, and then, operation of those wind farms.
And we're going to talk about that in detail later. Not to give away the ending of your paper, but the first line says that human actions, and that's the word you use, I had to Google it myself this morning, but say it again for me.
Anthropogenic.
Yes, that one. It means human actions. So the first line of your paper says that human actions are threatening whales globally, and that's what we're seeing. So there is an increase in whale strandings that the U.S. is seeing.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. So, and again, particularly for humpback whales, there's been an increase in humpback whale strandings since about 2016. I should mention also that minke whales, which are a smaller species of baleen whale, have also been stranding frequently since that time. But we've seen that the biggest increase in humpback whales. And again, they're the species that strand the most frequently.
And do you know why we're seeing that mostly in the mid-Atlantic and especially here in New York? Why we're seeing the most strandings?
Well, that is the question that we try to get into in this paper. And really, I think it's a combination of several different factors. So one thing that we found when we looked at vessel data, and we looked at data from different ports along the East Coast and looked at vessel traffic, There's been generally an increase in vessel traffic, but that increase in vessel traffic has been particularly pronounced in New York and Virginia, which are also hotspots of strandings, but also in particular of strandings that have been confirmed to be due to vessel strike. In combination with the changes that we've seen in vessel traffic in those two states suggests that mortality due to vessel strike is an important factor in these increased strandings since 2016. However, there are other important things going on here as well. For example, I am a marine biologist and I work on humpback whales in New York waters. And there's been an increase in humpback whale sightings, particularly in inshore waters. Humpback whales have been regularly using New York waters in the summer since about 2011. So they're in addition to these changes in vessel traffic, there are changes in what the whales themselves are doing. New York and the Gulf of Maine are feeding grounds for humpback whales. Traditionally, the Gulf of Maine was thought of as sort of the southernmost feeding ground for humpback whales on the East Coast. But since about 2011, humpback whales have been regularly using New York waters as feeding grounds in the summer. So there's been this change in habitat use, likely associated with the increase in population. The population has been increasing in recent decades. That's also playing a role. So basically, we've got humpback whales expanding into new regions, using those regions more regularly. And at the same time, we've got increases in vessel traffic in those areas. So a number of different factors together, we think, influencing the patterns of strandings and mortalities that we're seeing.
There's a misconception in the general public about how many ships are actually in our waters. A quick Google search by me was 50,000 merchant vessels are on the seas at any given time. Now, an important thing that I also found out, 40% of all cargo ships are carrying fossil fuels. So there is a tremendous amount of ships out there that are carrying fossil fuels around. And people that are in favor of renewable energy, not just offshore wind, as those renewable energy projects come online, that'll be less fossil fuel ships out on the waters. Do you think that a overall decrease in vessels on the water could help the whales?
Oh, certainly. I mean, I think that increased vessel density, I think, is a part of the problem that we're seeing here. Again, our paper found that regions of higher vessel density, or I should say higher vessel traffic, were the places that we were seeing, and particularly increases in that vessel traffic during this period of time were the places that we're seeing more whale strandings.
So you devote an entire section of the paper to offshore wind development. It's obviously a hot topic, not just in clean energy, but on Long Island and the places where these projects are being proposed. So let's kind of go through what you found, what you researched. There's a belief out there by many, many people that offshore wind development was the cause of all these recent whale strandings, when it doesn't take a too hard look at the facts to disprove that.
So I think it's important to be aware of the timeline when we're discussing this issue. So the period that this paper focused on, because of data availability, was up to 2022. And up until that point, there was really only a very small number of wind turbines actually in the water. I believe it was 5 wind turbines off of Block Island and an additional 2 wind turbines off of Virginia. So I know there's a great deal of discussion about offshore wind, but again, up until very recently, there really hasn't been a whole lot of construction of offshore wind farms. And the construction of offshore wind farms may pose a threat to whales and other marine mammal species because of the noise associated primarily with pile driving. So there's a great deal of monitoring and mitigation associated with that construction and pile driving. Again, importantly, during the time frame that this paper was focused, and again, really into the last year or so, there just has not been a lot of construction. So to me, that's a really important thing to sort of recognize up front. So the sort of phases that have happened to date, or the phase, I should say, is that the pre-construction surveys. And we became aware, actually, while working on this paper, of the interest in these surveys, these high-resolution geophysical surveys that are done as part of the site assessment and characterization. So what we did in this paper was a very coarse scale analysis of when and where those surveys were taking place and how that compares to when and where the strandings were taking place. And in a nutshell, this increase in strandings really predates, when that number of surveys was taking place, and also where and when the surveys were taking place in comparison to where and when the strandings were taking place, really does not match up. But I do think it's important to note that, particularly during construction, it is a concern, and it's something that merits a lot of monitoring and mitigation, and I think is going to be studied in a lot of detail. There is a great deal of mitigation surrounding the construction of wind farms in particular.
Yes. So even though it's been conclusively proven by you and others that there has been no impact, there's no correlation up till now of the increase in whale strandings and offshore wind development, that doesn't mean the job's done, because like you said, there's a lot that needs to be done to make sure that offshore wind farms are conducted in a manner that's safe, not just for whales, but for all marine life.
I feel comfortable absolutely saying we found no evidence for links between offshore wind development to date and these strandings, and that the increase in strandings predated even these site assessment surveys. But what we did see, our analysis suggested that vessel strikes in particular seem to be playing a role in these increase in strandings and mortalities.
Is that being fixed? Is anyone working on this? Is there, how do we, kind of get the world together to agree on a solution?
I mean, it's as you can imagine, it's not an easy problem to fix. Faster vessels are more likely to kill whales, so slower vessels and slowing vessels down can be an important part of a solution. There's mitigation focused on North Atlantic right whales. There are these seasonal management areas that are focused in times and places where right whales are, based on their migrations. We use ocean gliders. These are autonomous underwater vehicles that go up and down in the water column. We can deploy them for about a month at a time. They're providing all kinds of oceanographic data. But in addition, they have these passive acoustic recorders that listen for whales and can actually identify and send us that information in real time. And that can be used to trigger slowdown zones. So this is used right now for North Atlantic right whales, which of course are critically endangered.
So what's next? Are you going to follow up on this research or keep an eye on the numbers, or how do you keep this going?
One of the PhD students in my lab, Chelsea Napoli, is sort of taking this a step further. So what we did in this paper was look at strandings, look at vessel traffic in different ports, and look on a broad scale at different threats. Chelsea is now building a risk model for humpback whales using all of the data in real time that's out there on vessels out on the water. So looking in more detail at vessel density and vessel speed and trying to figure out, for example, are there particular sizes of vessels that are of concern here? To what extent is vessel speed playing a role in this problem? And can we actually develop models of risk that could be used to help to mitigate this issue?
Excellent. Well, we look forward to maybe having you back, and you can explain once that research is done, because it is an important topic that certainly is not over. Lesley Thorne, I want to thank you for joining us today on Plugging In.
Thank you so much for having me. It was fun.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Plugging In. I hope you learned something, and I hope you share this knowledge with someone else. It would be incredibly helpful if you leave us a 5-star review wherever you found this podcast. If there's a topic you would like us to cover in the future, or have a question about clean energy, send us an email at podcast@aceny.org. You can follow us on social media using the links in the show notes, or consider joining our Clean Energy Supporters mailing list at aceny.org/support. Your support is crucial to creating a brighter and healthier New York. I'll see you next time.
As the sun crests on the horizon, a new day dawns in our state. A new hope for tomorrow is rising, a clean future we create. Tomorrow we breathe easier, tomorrow the skies are clear. Today we are plugging in